Welcome, welcome. You are at the Haus Alpenz virtual trade tasting for autumn 2020. Our tasting today is going to run about 1 hour's time. We're going to taste through 6 different items. So if you received your little tasting kit, now's the time to crack that open and set out your glasses. At any time during the presentation, you are welcome to tap in a message to us. We'll be answering throughout, as well to be a live Q&A session at the conclusion. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are and who I am. My name is Eric Seed. I'm the founder and owner of Haus Alpenz. Established the business, was on my own back in 2005. But today we're a team of 17 full-timers living as far afield as New York, Western Mass, the Washington, D.C. area, Atlanta, Austin, Denver, and of course here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. We are national importers, and we also have our own distribution team. You saw the photos in the state of New York. We do cover all but West Virginia, so 49 states and territories, and yes, including Hawaii, that you see here in the photos. So, people, place, and purpose. These 3 words underpin all that we do and reflect in our portfolio selections. The people. It's not just us. It's hardly about us. We work almost exclusively with small family producers who have made for generations in the place of provenance what we represent. We are as loyal to them as they are true to their heritage. They're good people to work with, and their commitment reflects in the qualities and consistencies we all seek. The producers you see here today, that man front and center, standing high on the hill, that's Jürgen Haas. He's the current generation producer for the Zirbenz Stone Pine Liqueur that we'll be tasting today. A few other names and faces you may recognize here. And place. Place matters, whether by source of ingredients, soil conditions, style of production, cellar conditions, and of course the drinking traditions. Our customers love the stories and the history. Some of our very first customers for Batavia, Iraq, were readers of the Master and Commander series, who wanted to taste the Batavia Iraq that they read about that the British drank while in their bunkers along the lines of the Torres Vedras, catching the French off guard. This is back in the 1810 Peninsular Campaign. The French thought there were no defenses until Lisbon. Little did they know about those sitting in the bunker drinking the Batavia Iraq. Or for our tropical and tiki enthusiast, who want true Barbados falernum. Of course, that's the Velvet falernum, John D. Taylor's. They see that as a cornerstone to so many of their drinks, but they want to know it's the real deal. And here you see it, a reference, an advertisement for a Barbados newspaper, 1805, one of the earliest known references to the drink falernum as we know it today. Place also matters in our travel ambitions and our dreams, an escape from everyday life, and especially from this awful pandemic. Think of that drink in your hand as a stepping stone to actually being there. But place also matters, in our what's referential to us in our everyday life. Simple to say, it's like the smells and taste of a place. But, that magical smell of fresh cut grass, the grig arising from the fields, the smoke and woodsiness of the campfire, the minerality, the salinity of the ocean, and the pines of the forest, or your Christmas tree. We believe these smells and tastes have real reference and relevance to a broad audience who can relate to them. So that gets to the products themselves. So while many of the brand names might not at first be familiar, the taste and the smells are referential to their place of origin in the world we live in our home cities. Today we'll taste the Zirbenz Stone Pine, and as it's the taste of the woods. The Amaro Sfumato, smokiness, violet flowers, apricots. We all know apricots. It was in our baby food, and it's delicious. Also underpins so many great drinks. Falernum, a cornerstone to tropical and tiki drinks. Batavia Rack, it's like the mezcal of the rum world. And of course, Dolan Vermouth, sort of one of the greats of the world of vermouth. Bringing these things home to our, for our customers, it's more relevant than ever today. Not just because of a revival of cocktails in and of themselves, but what people are doing in their homes and even how they're building their homes. Today, it's quite common, if not standard, when building a kitchen to have an open format with a bar-like seating in the kitchen. And some even build in their own home bar. Look closely on that home bar, and you'll find on the second shelf a bottle of our Dolan Genevieve. In this picture from a random Google search about that. What we're not going to focus on today are the Dolan and Koki that many of you may already carry. Thank you. But we can for sure take any questions you have on these items or anything else we're not tasting through the message section or in the Q&A at the finish. So let's get started tasting.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Clark, the National Marketing Manager for Haus Alpenz, and I'm going to give you a brief tour of our website, starting obviously with the homepage. And right now I'm going to take my video off screen so that you can see the entire website and I'm not blocking anything. On the homepage, you have links to articles that are written both by members of our team as well as outside sources. And up at the top here, you can see navigational menus. You can search for our products in a few different ways, by category, by mousing over the wines and spirits menu, by producer, and by origin, if you're looking for wines and spirits from a certain country. Next up is our recipe database, which really comes in handy, especially when you have somebody come into your store or restaurant wanting to know, hey, what do I do with, for instance, Koki Americano Bianco? I had this already checked off in choose by product. When you come to the recipe database, you will have all of our recipes in a big long list, almost 500 of them. And you can also search for recipes via these different parameters on the left-hand side. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to click Koki Americano Bianco again so that I can narrow my recipes down to recipes that use Koki Americano Bianco. And again, here you can see them in a big long list. Another really easy way to search for recipes for one particular product is simply just to use our search window and type in your desired product. And one of the search results will always be the drink recipes for that product. And here, when you get this search result, they are all on one page. So that comes in handy. I'm going to go ahead and click on the first recipe, the Adelita cocktail. And when you do that, you get to the cocktail detail page, which includes information in a thumbnail view on all of the products that are used in that cocktail. And if you click on a particular product here, then you go into a more detailed product page for that item. And you got here everything you get from bullet points about this thing to producer information to a map showing where it's from, information about the category, about pairings, and so forth. You get sort of a truncated list of recipes that we consider to be the canonical recipes for that product. And then all the setup information that distributors, retailers, and the like need, including downloads for bottle shots, label shots, and shelf talkers. Now, if you're looking for this information sort of all in one place for all of the products, the next page I'm going to show you will come in handy. And that is under our resources menu. You want to go to setup. And here you find all this key information for all of our products. And if you scroll horizontally, you'll be able to get the entire view, basically. Now, if you're looking at this information and indeed this website on a smartphone, you'll want to put it in landscape mode because some of the things won't show up, especially these big horizontal items, unless you're in that mode. And that also goes for the recipe database. In order for this drop-down menu to be optimized on a cell phone, put it into landscape mode and you should be able to get to where you need to go. Also under the resources menu is storage and handling. And this is really good for people who might be unfamiliar with the categories of wine that we're known for, particularly aperitif wines. Information about how long they keep in the fridge, information about temperature at which they should be served, and so forth. And we also have that information for all of the wines in our portfolio, including the Sotalon Selections portfolio of oxidative wines. And with that, I am going to hand you over to Eric again, who will tell you about two of our historic French aperitif wines. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. So please open your test kit. Take out the sample of Comoz. Comoz Vermouth Blanc de Chambéry. In the history of Vermouth, there are two historic designations of origin for Vermouth. Torino, today Piemonte in Italy, and Chambéry, which is today in the Savoie of France. But when Vermouth was first made in those regions, they were both part of the same kingdom of Savoy. So, Chambéry, where is it? It's about an hour southeast of the city of Lyon, and it's at the foothills of the French Alps. In the city of Chambéry, the first producer was Dolan, starting their Vermouth production in 1821. Incidentally, had their 200th anniversary next year. But it was roughly 30 years later that one of their employees, a fellow named Claudius Comoz, decided to leave and start up his own Vermouth production. And in 1881, he introduced what became his signature product, Vermouth Blanc. Now, his claim was that he was the inventor of Blanc Vermouth. And while there were other pale styles of vermouth that preceded, Claudius employed the latest in filtration. But as important, he had a unique style to his, which really set his apart. His came with notes of stone fruits, alpine flowers, and a deep, resonant undercurrent of wormwood. Today we taste this and we think that the deeper profile marries so well with whiskey, perhaps better than any other pale or Blanc vermouth. The vermouth, and his vermouth, is perhaps most famous for a cocktail made not in France, made not in the US initially, but one of the most famous cocktails of Cuba, El Presidente. So you'll see from the document on the left, that was the approval that was given by both the local French authorities, as well as the Council of Cuba, allowing it to be imported into Cuba. And for many years, it was the only vermouth of France that was in Cuba. So, aside from El Presidente, perhaps the most famous of drinks, and probably the easiest for the home consumer, is the Savoy Spritz. And it's as simple as it gets. It's simply Comoz Blanc, our friend the soda siphon, over ice, sliced strawberries. That drink became so famous that roughly 30 or so years after his creation of Comoz Blanc, most of the, at which point probably close to 10 producers by the 1920, 1930, most of them started to make a bottled strawberry vermouth. Now, many of us, simple on soda, works beautifully. You'll find that its tremendous depth of flavor is pleasing not just in spritzes, but that depth plays really well when just simply mixing 50-50 with other spirits. As mentioned earlier, it doesn't simply have to be just Blanc spirits, gin, vodka, or tequila, but it plays really, really well with bourbon or rye. It's important to note that in France, the most popular style of vermouth sold is the Blanc vermouth style. And again, today, the most popular drinks with it is that simple spritz with soda. That said, as many of us know, the world of vermouth had its grand apex probably in the early part of the 20th century. And by the 70s and the 80s, the market was in decline everywhere, not just here in the United States. And as that market shrank, folks at Comoz did close down their facility and contracted with Dolan to produce this vermouth. And given the resurgence of vermouth and also interest from some interested customers, Dolan had kept the product in some limited production over the years. And finally, about 2-3 years ago, restarted the formal production. So we're very happy to be able to offer it to you here in the United States. So if there are any more questions on Comoz, please do tap them in the message bar, or you can ask us at the end. Next in our presentation is Bonal Gentiane-Quina. So Bonal has long been a darling amongst many of us and in the bar community, doing magic in so many simple drinks. So what is it? So Bonal is an aromatized wine. It's a quinquina. So it's not a vermouth, where vermouth has a base of wormwood, but instead has quinine. Quinine we know principally from tonic water, but also today there are a number of other quinquina that you'll find on market, including the Cap Corse and the Bia quinquinas, which we also make available. You'll also see, as by the name, that it has in it gentian. And this gentian root, it's a flowering plant. It gives a florality and an earthy back palate bitter. There's also a round and supple front palate that you'll taste, and that comes from using mistels instead of wine. Mistels being fortified, unfermented grape juice. That's a common practice in the world of quinquina, to use mistels instead of wine. But you'll also find with Bonal, there's a back palate that's bitter and drying. All in all, a very different profile than what we may be expected, what we might be used to with vermouth. So I think the consequence of all this is you'll find that Bonal gives space and texture for the aromas of apples and the balance the tannins of whiskeys. And I'd say that few things are better to pair with the sometimes bold tannins that you'll get with many of our new American bourbons and ryes. That gentian element to this. Gentian's famous for imparting refreshing feeling on the palate and a calming to your constitution. There was a time when that feeling was associated with getting more value from your food and living better. Hence the old slogan, the key to the appetite. But we're selling alcohol, not health claims, but we do sell deliciousness. In the early 20th century, Bonal was a sensation in the southeast of France. So adored was the product for its feeling that it was adored in the sporting community. Believe it or not, in the 1930s, they were a sponsor, amongst others, of the Tour de France. That said, for us, the focus is, its taste, its deliciousness, its application in drinks. And, while in the home country, it's typically consumed with soda or tonic water. And I would say as well, in the summertime, Bonal with tonic and a squeeze of lemon, it does its magic. But come wintertime, having Bonal with, say, fresh pressed apple cider, bourbon, and a squeeze of lemon, it's just utterly sensational. Highly recommended. In tandem with that, at holiday times, as we know, everyone loves something bubbly. So, pairing Bonal with the ciders that you may carry in your bar or retail shop, it's a natural pairing. So, if you have any questions about Bonal, by all means, tap them in the message bar. We can address them for you at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Next, we're going to talk about one of our favorite smaller Italian producers, a great old traditional Amaro and liqueur producer in Trento in the north of Italy, Antica Erboristeria Cappelletti. And everything you need to know about them and their history is really right there in the name. Antica, old. They're old. In particular, what we think of in the world of Italian liqueurs is if you come from before World War I, then you started in those kind of older traditions of using regional ingredients and often keeping a lot of different recipes around. And that's certainly the case with Cappelletti. Erboristeria means natural pharmacist. And in fact, Cappelletti established a shop in the center of Trento, the town that they're in. And it's still there. They don't own it, but a lot of their products are still sold there, right on the main square. It's right where the Christmas markets are held every year. And of course, Cappelletti, the family of which Maddalena and Luigi are the folks that keep the fires burning today. What's a lot of fun about working with Maddalena and Luigi is that they genuinely love bitterness. The Italian domestic market for these sorts of things often likes things a little bit sweeter, a little bit thicker, a little bit richer. They're often drinking Amaro next to a pretty bitter espresso. But the palate and the skills and the history and the tradition of Cappelletti is very much more toward that bitter backbone, which is so important for us when we're mixing cocktails with their great products. Like a lot of producers, they have a lot of recipes, a big, thick recipe book, but they only make a few of those products for themselves to market, and the rest they make sort of once a year for the Christmas market or for their little shop, all sorts of different things. But their real focus and what we get to do with them are old traditional bitter recipes. One of the other things that goes through all of their products is that they don't really love caramel. We already talked about they don't love super sweet, but caramel in and of itself, something you see a lot in a lot of mainstream Amari, doesn't work all that well in cold cocktails, we find. If you think about eating a Milky Way bar right out of the fridge, it's kind of the same thing. If you take an Amaro or a Vermouth or an aromatized wines that's super high in caramel, it's going to make a cocktail very thick. You may lose some of the nuance of the other things you've put in the drinks. A great example of that is Amaro Sfumato, which is dark, but it's dark not from caramel, but from rhubarb root, the natural rhubarb root tincture that provides all the smokiness as well to Amaro Sfumato. If you haven't tried that in a while, I definitely recommend you check it out. Another part of the history of Aperitivo Cappelletti is a penchant for wine-based products. And in fact, 3 of the products that we do with them are wine-based. And we talked about them being old, being pre-1919, pre-World War I. That was the case back then. If you were a small producer, you only had the ingredients around you, and distilled alcohol was pretty expensive. So in Trento, in the Alto Adige, they had wine, and they used it. They used it as their basis, and it created this great diversity of products, but also this products with wonderful acidity and brightness, which leads for us to mixability today. Today, we're going to talk about one of those products. So go ahead and open your bottle of Aperitivo Cappelletti. If you've got a bit of club soda around, this would be a great time to splash it in and make what we call a real spritz. Cappelletti Aperitivo is a red bittner. This is the world that's become quite burgeoning today. There's as many as 20 on the shelves of some bottle shops. The red bitter category stretches from very, very light, maybe even as low as 11% alcohol, things that are often used in spritz type drinks, to bigger, heavier, thicker, sweeter, more bitter liqueur and amari that are often used in things like Negronis. What's fun about Aperitivo Cappelletti is it works in kind of both of those realms. It's wine-based, so it's got a lot of texture without a ton of sugar. It may come across as quite sweet, but it's actually quite a bit drier than pretty much everything else in this category. The wine also brings some acidity to the party, which helps make your drinks more refreshing. Aperitivo Cappelletti is also naturally colored. If you don't want to have red dye number 40 in your life, the traditional carmine coloring of Aperitivo Cappelletti is a great old call out to a tradition in the region, but also an expression of wealth and good taste all over Italy. We talk about Aperitivo Cappelletti and mixing in both worlds of the red bitter. Spritzes, which we'll talk about a lot more when Lee comes on next. Yeah, that word spritz doesn't mean one specific drink. That word spritz really refers back to the incredible craze for fizzy water and fizzy drinks in the late 1800s, the drink of leisure. But because that time was before 1919, a lot of those fizzy drinks were made with aromatized wines, and some of them were made with wine-based red bitter. So you see here a very typical spritz idea: Aperitivo Cappelletti and club soda. You don't need the wine in it for texture or for that vinous character, because the wine is already in the Cappelletti, but a little splash of wine or sparkling wine wouldn't hurt at all. Now, the other side, of course, is the sort of bigger, thicker, richer stirred drink side. We think a lot about the Negroni and the Boulevardier. What's fun about Aperitivo Cappelletti in the Negroni especially is it just brings a delicacy to the drink. The acidity of the wine, the lower sugar, really allows you to taste all the ingredients in the drink really well, including the gin. You know, if you make a big, thick, sweet Negroni, sometimes you lose that nuance of the gin, or you lose the structure of the gin. So the other thing with that extra acidity and that extra brightness makes a Negroni that's really an aperitif cocktail, a Negroni that can get your evening started, get your meal started. You don't have to wait for it to dilute with ice for the sugariness to go down. So that's a very brief look at Aperitivo Cappelletti and a wonderful producer that we love in the north of Italy, Cappelletti. Next, we're going to talk about the broader idea of the spritz. We've talked a little bit about that already with the love of fizzy drinks and fizzy water, but Lee Edwards has got all the details.
Thank you, Jake. Before I talk about the spritz, I want to encourage all of you to make one if you so choose. If you have any Bonal and Comoz still in your bottles. Those are pretty delicious, mixed in equal parts with club soda. So mix those up if you have it. Now let's talk about spritzes. It is due to the invention of carbonated water decades before people started spritzing that we're able to even talk about the spritz today. I would love to talk more about all that went into the inventing of carbonated water, but that unfortunately is a rabbit hole I don't have time to go down today. The word spritz does come from the German verb spritzen, meaning to spray. This is a reference to adding water to wine. What we know of today as northeastern Italy was in the late 18th century and early 19th century part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Austrians living in that part of Italy at that time would add water to the Italian wines to get a lower alcohol level, making it more reminiscent of the ales and lagers that they were accustomed to drinking in their home villages. Austrian soldiers, interestingly, popularized using the word spritz in the World War I era. And the most common way to splash water into wine, starting in the late 1800s, was the siphon. And a nice quote from Francois Monti, a wonderful historian from Spain. The siphon was a basic element of all aromatized wine cultures. People were spritzing in France, Italy, and Spain from the late 19th century. The soda siphon first became famous in hotels, bars, later movies and TV. I myself first learned what a siphon was from movies and TV growing up. And then it became even a part of home entertaining by the mid-1900s. And now to talk about the modern spritz and variations thereof. The spritz has a broad and expansive history in service, far beyond that of one individual drink or one individual country. Spritzes truly reflect a regional perspective on the aperitif. You look at bitter aperitifs in northern Italy, and not just of the red variety. You look at white wine spritzes in England and Austria, Rojo Vermouth in the Barcelona area, and Chambéry Blanc in France. As Eric mentioned, the most popular vermouth style in France. So thinking of the spritz as more than an aperitif and club soda also opens up possibilities. Think about sparkling wine. You could do a Negroni Sbagliato with vermouth, bitter, and sparkling wine. Thinking about lagers or ale. Here, that was a nice photo of our Coqui Rosa and soda. Very delightful. Looks like a nice place to be right now. The next slide, lovely photo of the Amer Frontier. So you got a 8-ounce lager with an ounce and a half of Bonal, reminiscent of the beer pecan in France. If you want to get into ciders, fall is the perfect time to do an aperitif, which is Bonal with apple cider, and then tonic. Examples: Dolan Genepi with tonic. Call that the après-ski. And the spritz that I encouraged you all to make a few minutes ago, if you made that with tonic, you would get what we have in our recipe database as the Chambéry tonic. So a lot of ways to look at the spritz. And I want to leave you with a quote from a wonderful book from a few years ago. The spritz's biggest secret is that it is really much more than a recipe or a category of drinks that calls for the mixing of Italian booze and wine. The Spritz is a regional perspective on the aperitif. And with that, I want to hand you back to Jake Parrott so that he can tell you all about Hayman's London Dry Gin. Jake?
Thanks, Lee. Now we're going to move over to more the spirited side of our presentation today, and we're going to start with Hayman's London Dry Gin. So go ahead and open up that sample bottle, pour some in a glass, try a little by itself, but then I highly recommend that you dilute it about 50-50 with some still water and try it again. We'll talk through that more as we go through this. Hayman's one of our favorite producers, of course. We've got a range of gins from them. We started with Hayman's Old Tom Gin and the green label there, the Royal Dock Gin, the 57% alcohol Navy Gin, not just a Navy strength gin, but a true Navy gin sold to the fleet at the Royal Dock at Deptford. And a slow gin, which has two remarkable characteristics. One, you can really taste the sloes, the beautiful heirloom berries from the English countryside, but you can also taste the gin, which is the really key point for Hayman's when they make slow gin. The Hayman family date back to 1863 in the gin world. They're the oldest gin distilling family in London. They started in Cale Street in Chelsea in southwest London with the Burroughs, James Burrough, eventually Marjorie Burrough, who became famous for gins and liqueurs from then, and their recipes survive today. Today, the fourth generation, Chris Hayman, keeps those fires burning, and his daughter and son, Miranda and James, run the business. Their production, their gin recipes have stood the test of time, and that's a hard test. You know, there's a lot of different things that gin has had to be over the years. It's had to be cost effective, but most of all, gin has had to be versatile. It's had to be used in a lot of different ways. If you go back to the dawn of the cocktail era, there weren't that many gins around, and there were a lot of gin cocktails. Some were strong and small, like a martini. Some were long and heavily diluted, like a French 75 or a silver gin fizz. And a gin had to work in every single one of those contexts. And the way Hayman's makes gin makes sure that it can. These are the most versatile gins on the market. Hayman starts with traditional botanicals. No flowers or herbs. Herbaceous spikes will often make it hard for a gin to go with mint or vermouth. Plenty of juniper, of course, a bit of citrus, spices, bitter notes, and of course that all-important orris root, which creates such great texture and fixes the other aromatics. Those botanicals are soaked for 24 hours cold in the pot of Marjorie, which is Hayman's famous pot still, and then the gins come out of Marjorie. Hayman's London Dry is the flagship. It has to be the most balanced because London Dry is the style that grew to be the most important style for gin cocktails. So Hayman's London Dry, you've got it in your glass right now. Hopefully you've diluted it 50-50 like we talked about. I want you to taste it 50-50, and I want you to notice a couple of things. One, it's still quite rich in flavor. It's still quite robust. That's a really important characteristic for a gin that you're going to make a lot of different drinks with. We call it dilutability, but you might just call it power or intensity. It's still balanced. You don't have a ton of flavor spikes one way or another. But the last important thing, I think, is something that manifests when you taste Hayman's London Dry diluted like this, which is this dark, sort of oily character. I get it on the middle or middle back of my tongue. It really comes out when you dilute it. I was in the Hayman distillery last November, and the distiller was working on some juniper-only distillates. He was checking juniper berries from a few different suppliers. And so I got to taste a line of juniper-only distillates with the distiller. And the thread that ran through all of them was that dark, rich, oily character. And it really hit home for me that that is what juniper tastes like when you distill it. It doesn't taste like pine. It doesn't taste like a forest. That at its core, juniper, when it's distilled and held together, has this great, dark, oily character. And that comes through, I think, in spades when you taste Hayman's London Dry diluted. So what do you have here? You have a gin that's nicely dilutable, it's nicely balanced, and has plenty of flavor of juniper. to me, that's what it means for a gin to be versatile. So it's great for a gin tonic, which is a long diluted drink. It's great for a drink like a Blonde Negroni, which has a lot of other botanical things going on and provides a botanical backbone. But you know, what you have in your glass right now is just a no vermouth martini. And while we love dry vermouth in our martinis, of course, plenty of folks out there don't. And that Hayman's London Dry works great when all you want is a no vermouth martini. Now we're going to talk about another one of our gin products. It's our one American product. It's a Damson gin made from heirloom Damson plums grown in New York State. And we have a very special guest today who happens to be the producer of Averell Damson Gin. That's Scott Cron. Scott?
Thanks for the intro, Jake. I'm excited to share some information with you all about the Averell Damson Gin Liqueur. The inspiration for the product harks back to the turn of the 20th century. This is a time many consider to be the golden age of fruit and vegetable propagation in the United States. From about 1885 to 1915, the USDA actively worked with American farmers to develop over 7,500 new and unique fruit and vegetable varieties to support the emerging markets. Government commissioned artists were tasked with cataloging the new varieties as watercolors. And today, the pomological watercolor collection is still housed at the USDA Library in Maryland and considered to be one of the more unique collections in the United States. Unfortunately, this progressive era was short-lived, and by the middle of the 20th century, the emergence of the supermarket, commercial farming, and mass distribution forced many of these varieties into extinction. When you look at the endangered fruit marking on Averell's label, the lion's share of heirloom varieties went into extinction because of lack of use as opposed to overuse. And fast forward to today, when you go into a supermarket, I mean, there's even generally 4 or 5 varieties within a popular fruit category, such as apples. And that just goes to show how little variety there are in heirloom fruit varieties. In terms of the Damson itself, it's one of the oldest known fruit variety, one of the oldest known plum varieties. It originated in Damascus, Syria, and then it spread west. It was later prized by the Crusaders, Romans, and early American colonial settlers. It's a little bit larger than a cherry with a small clingstone pit, and it's incredibly sour with floral notes and warm winter spice undertones, and the skin is extremely astringent, bitter. Relative to the fruits of other gin-based cordials, which are wild grown and food for the deer if not consumed, Damsons are cultivated variety. They're prized by chefs, brandy producers, and producers of plum jam, where they really are a star. And really today, Red Jacket Orchards in upstate New York is one of the only orchards in the Northeast to grow damsons as a commercial endeavor, roughly one row of 25 trees. When it comes to production, it's important to get into the origin of these gin-based fruit liqueurs. And their origin is really a result of an abundance of wild-grown fruit within cottage regions across Europe. With very little equipment or technology, people could make these elixirs simply by steeping the local fruit in spirit and sugar. And the results of the maceration method include some interesting tertiary flavors. However, the longer the steep, the less representative the end product is of the fresh fruit, or as they say in the orchard industry, fruit out of hand. By contrast, Averell is made with the fresh pressed juice of damson plums. The juicing process is laborious. It requires modern machinery, and the end result, produces a liqueur that's more austere than say with maceration. It more closely represents the characteristics of biting into a fresh damson. One of the other main differences with Averell is in the alcohol content. Whereas categories such as slow gin, they have no restrictions on alcohol percentage by TTB. Yet, TTB requires that gin liqueurs, the category gin liqueurs, be above 30% ABV. So consequently, Averell is quite a bit drier than other fruit liqueurs, and because of that, it makes it a really solid candidate as a base spirit in many classic and modern cocktails. I mean, I often look at using the product, more as a base spirit in those proportions than as a liqueur. And that really leads into how you mix with Averell. It's an obvious choice for fall consumption. However, it begs for carbonation in the form of dry sparkling wine, club soda, or ginger beer, and this really makes it a true four-season product. It works wonderfully in stirred drinks with inherent acidity that livens up drinks that tend to be muddy, while inserting some interesting flavor notes of stone fruit and warm winter spice. And one of the last things I would say with Averell is it provides amazing color in drinks that you mix with it. Some historians will even claim that the skins of damsons were once used as dyes in the production of textiles and other household items. So yeah, that's about it for the Averell Damson Plum Gin Liqueur. With that, I'm going to pass you back to Eric C. He's going to chat with you about the product that's near and dear to all of our hearts, being the first product in our portfolio, which is the Zirbenz Stone Pine Liqueur.
Please look to your samples and pull the sample bottle of Zerbans Stone Pine Liqueur of the Alps. Now, while the thought of a pine liqueur might well be unexpected, most all of us can appreciate the smell of the Christmas tree, the smells when you walk in the woods, or when you're out skiing or golfing, hiking. It's something we can refer to, even if we're not familiar with the taste. And what you're about to taste is a long tradition extending from central Austria down into northern Italy. It's a tradition that's never stopped. It's alive and well, and you'll find it's this product, which they call Zerbans schnapps, served at restaurants, bars, and ski resorts all throughout these regions. The name Zerbens, or its root Zerban, is the name of this little baby pine cone that grows on the Averell stone pine. Some call it the Swiss stone pine. So it all starts with the picking of these cones in late June, early July, and rushing them back to the farm to macerate in wine or spirit. So the picking of the cones. You might wonder, do they really climb the trees? Oh yes, and I joined them for their harvest one year and took the photos that you see here. This is in a forest in South Steiermark, right near the border with Carinthia. So I joined this fella that you see on the right, and I ascended over 50 feet in childlike glee before my nerves really came alive. And trust me when I say that the farmers pick only what they can reach. When you're done, you're covered in this pine dust that you forget about after some beer and sausage. So few might realize that when the pine cones are very young, they are technically and still very much a fruit. And specific with the Averell stone pine, this fruit can be quite juicy. It's highly aromatic and slightly sweet. What they do is they take the cones and literally just slice them, and that's it. It's not a pine nut liqueur, although there are pine nuts within. It is a pine fruit liqueur. So they take these slices, have it macerate in alcohol, and after a period of time, filter, add a touch of sugar, although much of the sweetness does come from these baby cones. And that's it. And while you're maybe picking up notes of forest berries and menthol, this really is just made from the pine cones, sugar, and water. Our producer, Josef Hofer, they've been making Zerbans schnapps in various forms since their founding in 1797. It's their thing. And they're still today, it's still made by the very same family that traced their lineage back even further past the founding of the Josef Hofer. They're in the same village of Göttingen, which is near the ski villages of Schladming in Steiermark. So, you wonder, how do you mix with it? Well, mix for a cool old fashioned, see in the picture, no joke, what we call the Alpine hippie juice. And there's a really great pairing with pale ale. This combination was long on the menu at New York's Gramercy Tavern. You'll find these and more recipes on our website. So you probably wonder, well, how do they drink it in Austria? They drink it neat, après ski or after dinner. It's quite an experience. You get your first taste of it at dusk, and then the next morning when you throw open the curtains, look out to see the snow conditions, you see the sun, and then you see the trees, and you think back to that taste that you've had, and you'll never forget that moment. And what for some are memories of the great ski hills. For others, it's a memory of their hike in the woods, the golf outing, even decorating the Christmas tree. So, believe it or not, Zerbans was our very first product, together with an Alpine cream liqueur, when we started Haus Alpenz 15 years ago. So we've come a long way together. And I'll say on behalf of our team, we're happy to have joined this tradition, which stretches back over 200 years. So please join us. Prost.
Hi, folks. This is Jake Parrott from the national team. Lauren, can you bring my video up, please? We got some great questions already in. Might get to a few more while we're here, but I would love to be able to, well, you don't really want to see my face, but I know we'll need Eric and other folks up too when we can. I can assure you that Eric is behind the block that says Eric Seed. He is our founder and owner. I work on the national team. And while Lauren is working on
we have some incredible
video
questions.
stuff. Yeah, we have some great questions. So I'm gonna moderate, and we're gonna start with a question, a relatively simple question, but I think one that's good to at least get out there from Ty Martin out in Reno about sweeteners for aromatized wines. He particularly asks about the sweetener in Comoz, and I'm going to defer to Eric for that because he's our formula expert.
It's an easy one. It's our friend sucrose. In Vermouth, it's typically plain sugar with sweet red vermouth. It's a caramelized sugar. So typically the red color that makes sweet red vermouth famous, it's not from the wine, it's actually from the caramelized sugar. So the differences in color you typically see are actually from that sugar. It's not from using red wine, which is not traditional in sweet red vermouth. Oop, my video is off. So here we go. Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, there we are. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, if you want to learn more about the constituent parts of aromatized wines, I highly recommend the Wine and Spirits Education Trust Level 3 Spirits course. There is a ton of great information in a very short section on it in there. And of course, we're big fans of everything that WSET does, so and we help them out as best we can. Our next question, and I'll take this one, it's a cocktail question from, I think the name is pronounced Janae Delancey. Can Bonal be substituted for the Cap Corse Matés? The Cap Corse Maté is a set of 2 quinquinas from Corsica that we bring in. Really lovely, great high acidity. The question about Bonal as a substitute, I would say it's a little bit closer in profile to the Rouge, more bitter and savory, but Bonal is a little bit lusher, a little bit lower in acid than the Cap Corse Maté Rouge. And so if you're going to make the same drink with Bonal or Cap Corse Maté Rouge, I would say that the Bonal drink will end up a little bit creamier, a little bit more delicate, and the one made with Cap Corse Maté Rouge will be a little bit firmer and maybe a bit spicier. A couple of people asked about Mistel, and we did answer a little bit in the chat. Mistel, and I'm gonna let Eric talk a little bit about this too. Maybe Eric, you first. Talk just about like what is Mistel and why, and I'll talk a little bit about it. What happens to it in mixing?
I mean, there's a simple answer, and then there's a lot more complication. Think of Mistel as simply the grape juice fresh from crush, where you add alcohol to arrest fermentation, but the texture of grape juice is different than that of fermented wine, even partially fermented wine. So what we get in quinquinas, which typically use Mistel as their base, is a different texture, and that's in part because the sugars we're getting from the grape juice, from the grape product, are different. So that's the simple answer.
Yeah, and one thing I would say about Mistel, when you work in a cocktail with a product that's Mistel based versus wine based, is that Mistel will have a more primary characteristic of the grape, whether that's fruit or texture, but it will have less aroma from the grape. Whereas something that's wine based might have less texture from the grape, but more aroma, because when a wine ferments, it often gets those more complex aromas and that lift out. One of the things that I love to do with Mistel-based aromatized wines is make reverse cocktails, especially with clear spirits or spirits that are very strongly aromatic, like an agave spirit or a fruit brandy. You only have to use a little bit of that spirit to be able to smell it in the finished cocktail. And that's really cool. You end up with a drink that works great before dinner, but still has that core of the spirit expression. So that's something that I always look to do when I see something where the base is Mistel. All right, the next question comes from Megan Allred, and this is one that really piqued my interest. I'm gonna let Eric go down the botanical road with it, but a great sort of palate question. The question was, does gentian share any features or familiarity or relationship at all with elderflower? Megan picked up some stuff in the Bonal that reminded her of that sort of rich aromatic character of elderflower. Eric?
It's a great question. It's a great observation of your palate. I mean, the signature elements you get from gentian are both a floral front, and then the bitter development you get in the back palate and this radishy element. But the floral element is a signature of gentian, whether it's gentian lutea or what's the other gentian we have, the little baby gentian. But anyway, that is a prime characteristic of gentian. But there's no elderflower in our product. I can tell you that much. Thanks.
Let's see. So Jonathan's question on Bonal comparing to other quinquinas, I did sort of answer it when we talked about Bonal substituted for the Métais. One other thing that I'd like to talk about with Bonal in terms of mixing, I sometimes refer to Bonal as umami for stirred brown spirit cocktails. Like, it creates this intense savoriness, whereas a lot of other quinquinas are more about either the grape base or one particular botanical or the acidity or some combination thereof, whereas Bonal is kind of the most composed in some ways. It's a little bit, it makes for more complex cocktails. And honestly, I find that the best Bonal cocktails almost always are very simple drinks, simply because Bonal brings so much to the party. Now we have a little opportunity if Lauren can bring Ty in. Ty Martin is the owner and grand poobah of a wonderful little shop in Reno, Nevada called Craft Wine and Beer. I like to say that I go to Reno to visit Ty whenever I need my inspiration renewed, because he is such a force of nature out there. And Ty has a question that I think is a question that comes to a lot of people's minds when it comes to Aperitivo Cappelletti and the rest of that world. Lauren, do we have Ty? We have Ty's. We have at least we have Ty's beautiful icon.
Yeah, he should be. His voice should be with us.
Okay,
I'm
Ty,
here.
go ahead.
Okay, so my question was a kind of quick answer to the quick structural differences between Aperitivo, Bitter, and Americano, with a sidebar of what is the technical rule of Fernet? End question.
Eric?
Wow. Multiple category question.
Pretend a customer
Aperitivo
just
is
asked
a
you, they
style
have
of
no
service.
basis, and
sorry,
you
go ahead.
have like 30 seconds before their interest is lost.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate the Aperitivo is a style of service. Fernet is an original, one of the oldest styles of Amari. And was it about bitter or was it about Cappelletti?
Just bitter versus Aperitivo. So if Aperitivo is a service element, then that's answered. Bitter and Americano, Vermouth.
Mhm.
When
Great.
somebody says, what's the difference?
Great questions. So Americano is sort of an offshoot of the birth of Vermouth. Its origin is like to be a bittered Vermouth. And there's some stories about the role of America, but there's also the Italian Amaricante, which means to be bittered. And the basic story of Americano is gentian being added with wormwood and vermouth. Its earliest origin is all wine-based. So it's not to pick on anyone or play brand stories. It's just that was the world then. So yeah, Americano is like a bittered vermouth where you're adding gentian, and it's adding a different dimensionality of character to what was vermouth. I hope that helps.
So as far as what the base spirit is between bitter and the other categories, does it matter if it's basically starts as a hard alcohol, a neutral grain spirit that is then flavored and sweetened, or if it's based as wine that is then bittered and fortified?
Being a spirit or wine
Doesn't matter.
Historically never made a difference. I mean, we today segment between the two, but historically there was wine, and then later there was spirit accessible. These categories began as wine categories, and if you're adding gentian and other bitters onto your vermouth, it became what we know as Americano. So,
and then Fernet's not protected as an Amaro, other than just your honor.
I can go down the rabbit hole of a long story, and we can provide you some resources offline for this. Fernet is one of the oldest forms of a what the melange of Amari. Its origin was, we don't sell down this track, but its origin was more down as the medicinal track. Fernet, it didn't originate out of the path of Vermouth. And Fernet, we can say Fernet is Fernet, but it is one of the oldest forms of Amari. Historically, a lot of these things were all bitter. In the mid 19th century, they may have all been wine-based. It depends which producer you went to and sourced it from. Eventually, they evolved to things that were either spirit-based or wine-based. And it looks very different now.
So we're drinking medicine.
No.
We're not allowed to say that.
No. We sell alcohol. We're selling beverages. We're selling taste profiles, and we can't go down that path. There's some historic story to that, but we don't do that. It's a part of the history. We can't deny that, but I understand what you're asking. But we have to be clear when we're before our customers, whether our friends or whether we're selling forward, that these are taste profiles. And if they have a history as such and such, so be it. But that's not our business to sell health profile. That's very important. Don't get yourself in trouble.
Never. Can Brooke ask a question?
Sorry, I have Jake, it's Brooke here. Hello.
Hey, Brooke.
Quick question. I'm often faced with our customers coming into our establishment and talking about the interchangeability of an aperitivo versus a bitter. And people see bitter on a label, obviously, and their mind immediately goes to bitter. But to me, aperitivos as well, especially when we're talking about something like Cappelletti, which is labeled an aperitivo, has quite a strong bitterness to them. Is there a general rule of thumb that people can assume that the differences between them, or that they truly are interchangeable?
Yeah, this is what we're seeing today, of course, this rash of red bitter aperitif things is a lot of people putting aperitivo on a label for something that's a little bit lighter or lower alcohol, or in some cases less bitter. Rainier also asked a question along these lines. As I put in the presentation, I think the fun of Cappelletti is that you can use it in kind of both contexts. Mm-hmm. And it's the acidity in Cappelletti that pulls it through. The category of aperitivo is so nebulous that it's very hard to really ascribe that much to it. There's such widely disparate levels of sugar, of acid, of flavor intensity, and of bitter intensity. And it's, Cappelletti, analytically it's bitter enough, but it's the combination of the bitterness, the acidity, and the relative dryness that I think that really creates that palate impact. So
cool. Well,
thank you guys. So we must continue to educate ourselves on every product into its beautiful specificities.
All right. One more Cappelletti question. I think it's worth to dwell for a minute, Eric, if we could, on carmine, since it is such a key aspect of Cappelletti, and just maybe a quick carmine story if you've got one.
Well, there are books written on this, but carmine was one of the elements that made the great wealth of Venice. Jake, if you look in the poster, well, you've seen like behind Jake, the red, to have that color red in the 18th and 19th century was a symbol of wealth. And that color red largely came from carmine. Back then, to have that was seen as a sign of wealth, but never mind that. It's a natural color. It comes from cochineal, it comes from animal products, which it's very natural, but it's not an artificial color. It gives a deep garnet red, and yes, in its day and age, it was seen for other mythical and maybe health properties, but as we look at it, it's a natural color. There are some still today that might castigate the color because it's used to color meats in certain parts of the world. But the reality is it's a natural color, and it's long and important. Anyway, anything you'd add, Jake?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right. We've got some great questions coming in still. We have a question here a little bit up earlier, and this is one that I wanted to spend a bit of time on because there's some more generalities that come in it, and it's a question about the difference between Torino and Chambéry vermouths in terms of how they are characterized. Of course, we work with Cocchi. We make a wonderful Vermouth di Torino, as well as the Vermouth Amaro Dopo Teatro that's on the poster behind me. I'll talk a little bit organoleptically, and then Eric, maybe you can talk a little bit about the history. The first thing to say very, very clearly is, in general, Italian products tend to be sweeter than French products. It is just the nature of their local markets. If you line up a bunch of French-made vermouths, if they're not trying to just mimic Italian stuff, and a bunch of Italian-made vermouths or other aperitifs, in general, the Italian ones are going to be sweeter. And that's certainly the case if you look at Chambéry versus Torino today. In addition, Torino vermouth always, the base wine formed a much bigger part of the overall expected flavor profile of a Torino vermouth. So in the case of Cocchi Vermouth di Torino, it's that orange and aromatic character from Moscato, whereas in Chambéry, the vermouths were expected to be much more about the mountain botanicals and the herbaceousness and the delicacy and the freshness, and less about this big, rich expression of the wines. You might be able to say that there's a stylistic link back to the wines of each region, but that may be a bridge too far logically. Eric?
Well, I can, you covered that quite well, Jake. Look, there's a simplistic understanding amongst our consumers that the French vermouths are lighter and less sweet than the Italian vermouths. And look, there's a hard reality today that's not so much the case in the mind of our consumers. But for those looking at old cocktail books, when they see Italian vermouth vis-a-vis French vermouth, it's a general understanding. That said, yeah, the French vermouth, the herbaceousness shows a lot more higher in the profile. In the Italian, deeper, more resonant. I will say, when you look to what our producers offer, what Cocchi offers, when they say sweet vermouth, they take the sweet very seriously. And if you know the people behind it, who have their sweet tooths, they lean sweet. Sweet matters, and so carrying a profile through what's sweet in the general Cocchi Vermouth Torino, the storico as they call it, it's profiling through what's roughly 17 grams per liter of sugar. When they go deeper, and you'll find this when you taste other deeper bitter vermouth, Puntimez is a common reference. Puntimez might be 20-21 grams per liter sugar, but it counterparts that with more caramel bitter. With our Vermouth Amaro, as you see behind Jake, it's roughly the same degree of sweetness, but a very different bitter profile. I'm getting into the weeds. Let me leave that to more questions, but there's a meaningful difference between what you get from the French vermouth of the world historically and the Italian vermouth historically as well. I got long-winded there. Sorry.
Hey, thanks, Eric. All right, we have one other special guest question. This is I would say, I mean, maybe we'll call him my brother-in-law from another mother-in-law. Jared Sadoyan is the general manager of Craigie on Main in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've known Jared for a long time. Several of us have known Jared for a while. Jared is much like I go and see Ty at Craft to renew my inspiration. I go and see Jared when I really want to talk about both flavor, but also just the process of coming up with a drink and then selling that drink to human beings. And so he's a wonderful friend and wonderful resource and friend of our show for a long time. And Jared's got a question that will give Eric some room to run.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Eric, with any sort of like well curated portfolio, you certainly, I'm sure, have come across interesting, fun products that, for reasons that may relate to the bandwidth of yours and your teams or market forces or who knows what, that you haven't been able to bring into the U.S. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share what the most interesting product is that you've encountered that you haven't been able to bring to us here in the States.
Eric, before you start, we had a related question on in the chat about products from Baltic countries. So if you had any thoughts about those as well, but go ahead.
Jared, I'm not supposed to talk about what we can't do. But then there's this. Oh, geez, I did that. Arquebus. I took the photo away. Arquebus. It sounds like a leading question. Okay, I'll bring it back. I mean, we know arquebus as a shotgun, which should probably tell you it's probably not a good idea. And this is something that is sort of the corollary to chartreuse that was made by the Marist. And they made this well over 100 years. And then, as economical folks, they sold it off. And the last dregs of this were in like a Torino distillery. We tried multiple times to get this thing legalized, and it's chock full of everything the TTB says no about. There are things which we can question, but this was full of it was a beta-azarone. It was full of things that they consider carcinogenic, and I mean, it's all well and tasty. You can actually buy, where you are in Italy, I mean, depending where you are in Italy, you can find old bottles of it. I won't mention the current brand name that sells the remaining dregs of it because it's delicious, but it contains things that are blood thinners, things that are considered carcinogenic, and look, I can harp wild on things that are historic and delicious. What's important is when we can make them approachable, legal, and relevant for you to have and you to sell. And we make every effort we can to work with producers to find a legal path and hold true to the profile of what they offer. And in that case, since you and others, thank you all, 152 of you for staying on with us, have stayed, there are those cases where we really can't. And we can only tell you, if you really want to taste it, go there and buy those last remaining bottles that exist. I mean, in the case of arquebus, and it's not technically legal in its home country. That said, for what we do, and not to say it's a correlated to arquebus, we don't lose sight of the importance of profiles like that. And, where something can be legally made, we still pursue and, stay in touch with us. There's some things that, are on the slate. They were initially for this year. This was to be our 15th anniversary, and we had something special planned for release this year. It'll come next year, inshallah. That is of a historic profile where, we did find our way that, holds us to it. It holds to the profile. But that's all laugh and giggles until we taste you on it. And, ultimately, it doesn't matter unless it makes sense for you and your friends, your customers, and that the profile is meaningful. It's just, look, we all see these historic posters, these images, and we wonder, why were these profiles so great? What made them so important? And, we don't lose sight of that. Sorry for our caboose, but, we don't need any shotguns in our world.
Yeah,
Long-winded answer.
Capiletti's got a few things that are a little bit tricky for us as well.
Thank you, Jared. It's a great question.
They are amazing. All right, I'm going to bring in Lee Edwards. Lee Edwards, kind of our one of our great cocktail brains on the team. We had a couple of questions about wintertime gin cocktails and just how to expand the season for gin at retail. And Lee's got a few thoughts on the subject. There's a few in the Q&A as well, but I think it's a good one to bring out.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Scott and I, can you hear me? Okay, Scott and I partially answered a question in the Q&A. Averell and Hayman Slow Gin show those nice baking spices, those warming spices, which makes so much sense in October, November, December, January. You got the double dose of cinnamon in the Hayman's Old Tom in relation to the other gins they make. And that really makes it work for that season. The Martinez is an easy example. Old Tom, Torino, little splash of maraschino. Using either of those warm, the Averell or the Slow is fantastic. You got plummy, cherry, rich, robust spice profile. Those are going to work with red wine in a warm, drink. They're going to work all on their own warm. The Hayman's team always talks to us about going on fall walks with just a flask full of slow gin. And once somebody puts that idea in your mind, it sounds like the right thing to do. So those are some simple things that I would say. I don't know if Scott wants to chime in on how he likes to use the Averell specifically during the winter.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the presentation. The Averell, being at higher proof than slow gin, you can really use it as a base spirit in a lot of stirred cocktails. So we have a drink called Count of Mount Kisco, which is Solaire's, Averell, and Dolan Dry, and that's an amazing drink. It the acidity of the Averell brightens up a stirred drink that typically can get a little muddy, and then it brings in warm winter spices with base gin and the obvious plum flavors from the gin and the damsons.
Thanks, guys. Let's see. One more here and a couple I'll get to in the list. Eric covered this a little bit, but there was a question. We had a name change to the Dolin Genepi last year or the year before, from Genepi des Alpes to Genepi Le Chamois, which is a traditional name Dolin is used. Eric, do you want to go into anything more if there are any other changes associated with that?
Yeah, it's always difficult to explain whenever there's a label change. In this case, it's largely a matter of semantics. That the profile we had labeled as Genepi d'Alpes was what in the local market they called Genepi de Chamois. And in Chambéry, in the region, Dolin, they sell a number of varieties of their Genepi. And our initial interest and concern was like, look, this is of the Alps. It's an Alpine tradition. Now, from the time we introduced it, other producers in the broader region wanted to define Genepi d'Alpes as something more specific, and something specific that wasn't necessarily Genepi de Chamois as Dolan had it. So we changed the name to Genepi de Chamois as they have in the local market. And what Genepi de Chamois becomes for regional producers, I mean, it's not a world different, but look, it's like saying, we took something specific and gave it a general name, and the general name took on something more, so we give it its more specific name. Anyway, what you know in the bottle has not changed. The label, it's changed, and yes, we changed to a nicer bottle, but the liquid that you know, that's never changed. Simple as that. Good question. Thank you for noticing.
All right, starting to run down the questions here. There was a allergy question about Zerbens. Eric, is there orange in Zerbens? Is there anything in Zerbens other than Zerbens Apfel, the fruit? Nope, just the fruit. So
it's really just, I mean, imagine taking those fresh pine cones, not that we have, none of us, I'm sure, have any reference to this, literally taking them, slicing them, and I fear to think how they abuse their meat slicer putting these cones through them, because family producers, they slice them up and they put them in the alcohol and it soaks. They strain, they filter, and they add a touch of sugar. And it's sort of the art form beyond that. There's no fruit, there's no spice. It's really just that. And in the local market, if you add other stuff, you just don't do that.
All right, and then the last question I think we haven't touched on is it's another cocktail question. It's about cinnamon. Rainier asks, I love cinnamon. I love cocktails with cinnamon. Can we go deeper into that? I'm gonna throw this out to maybe Lee to start and then go from there. I mean, cinnamon is always tricky to work with because you've got to either make a syrup with it or you've got to infuse it somehow, and infusing it in water makes it different than infusing it with alcohol. But Lee?
Had to unmute myself there. We do have one or two cocktails in the database that call for a cinnamon syrup as one of the ingredients. But with that profile of cinnamon in the Hayman's Old Tom, my suggestion for somebody that loves cinnamon would be, how can you surround that Old Tom with other ingredients that just make the cinnamon shine better? And those with a wonderful gift of a better nose than me, or a palate such as Jake, are going to pick up on that greater amount of cinnamon in that Old Tom Hayman's. So it's just about framing it in a way that you're able to pull that out. But yeah,
I mean, I actually think Dolan Rouge with Hayman's Old Tom brings out the cinnamon quite nicely, because Dolan Rouge is relatively delicate. Dilution of often brings out a nice cinnamon note in Hayman's Old Tom as well. Then Rainer's other question is, a good, probably a good way to play us out and give Eric the last word. So before we do that, I want to thank all of you that stuck around, and all of you who are watching this recording later, for allowing us to bring a bit of fun and a little bit of, hopefully a little bit of education into your evening. Eric, Rainer asks about our underappreciated products. And I think that's a good way to reflect on the night and send us home.
Probably one of the most underappreciated products is what David Wondrich and the others in New York told me to chase after way back when in 2007. It's Batavia, Iraq. It's one of the oldest forms of cane spirit, of rum, as we would say, in the world. And it's what underpinned the world of punches and was the prize spirit in, you know, the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. And, you know, yes, it comes from Indonesia. It sounds funny. And, you know, I said earlier in the presentation, it's the sort of the mezcal of the rum world. And, you know, while things like that might sound very complicated, literally you take Batavia Iraq, you take a can of ginger beer. Here I'm holding up Beer of Giles, which is a fantastic ginger beer made here in the Twin Cities. There's great ginger beer everywhere now. This is special. And add a squeeze of lime. And it's extraordinary. I mean, for those of us that love high aromatics and searing flavors, and if you have look, if you go down the mezcal path, go down this way with the world of rum and go to Batavia Iraq. And I'd say explore all the Batavia Iraqs you can get. Not that many, but it's incredible. I'll leave it at that. So if that's what you're wondering, what's underappreciated, hands down, square that. Thank you.
And thanks. We all hope that that we get a chance to do this in person and share a beverage as soon as we can. Everyone be safe out there and keep on tasting. Good night.